Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Strong from Strong Medicine, talking to you from the midst of the Omicron surge here in the US, sitting here wondering if the pandemic will end before we run out of Greek letters. But what I'm going to talk about today is instead the word anti-vaxxer. In my COVID vaccine videos on this channel, I occasionally, and sometimes more than occasionally, use the word anti-vaxxer. Over the last 18 months, I've noticed an increase in folks who take offense to my use of that word. They appear to be upset that I have conflated the true anti-vaxxers of old, the granola crunchy, hippy dippy, crystal wearing, essential oil consuming nuts, with the cautious, concerned I've taken all of my other vaccines armchair researchers of today. It seems like prior to COVID, the term anti-vax was pejorative in almost all circles, and those declining the COVID vaccine today, they don't appreciate having a pejorative label applied to them. And so here are the questions I'm going to tackle. For whom is this label anti-vaxxer accurate, and is it an offensive slur? The reason I'm talking about this specifically now is because of a recent midlife crisis video in which the always thoughtful Dr. Francis talked about trust and lack of trust in the vaccines, among other things. It's a great discussion, and I recommend you watch it. In response to the video, I posted this comment. Thanks for so clearly describing the thoughts in my head. The pandemic tribalism is very real on both sides. Replacing nuanced discussion of scientific data with an insistence on ideological purity on all things COVID has created more anti-vaxxers than Wakefield's MMR paper did, and we are going to be dealing with that for a long time to come. Hopefully, the anti-vax sentiment, which the medical establishment inadvertently contributed to, will fade before the next pandemic, which, as you stated, could be far worse than COVID has been. In response to this comment of mine were a dozen or so direct replies in which other viewers claimed that my use of the word anti-vaxxer was offensive and inappropriate and a childish smear, and yes, a slur. A typical rebuttal was that they weren't opposed to all vaccines, just this one, so the term anti-vaxxer didn't apply to them. And this mirrors comments I've been receiving on this channel. So let's talk about this. First, there is a great diversity of beliefs among those individuals who have chosen to not be vaccinated against COVID. It is true that some only oppose the COVID vaccine, while others oppose all vaccines. And it's true that the strength of conviction in this opposition is also very variable. Not all individuals who would be included in this very broad group should be called an anti-vaxxer. So how do I define an anti-vaxxer? An anti-vaxxer is an individual whose opposition to being vaccinated is immutable to reason or evidence. In other words, an anti-vaxxer is incapable of being convinced to receive the vaccine, regardless of how much data is presented to them of its efficacy and safety, and regardless of how reliable and trustworthy that data is. This is different from a vaccine-hesitant individual who has concerns about the vaccine, but if a physician or an informed family member or friend discusses the evidence in a non-judgmental way and answers their questions, their opinion can be changed. I have not seen data about this, but I believe two things are true regarding anti-vaxxers and the vaccine hesitant in the US during the era of COVID. First, the vaccine hesitant are more numerous, even now, than anti-vaxxers. And second, the number of true anti-vaxxers now is much higher than it was pre-pandemic. As I allude to in my comment to Midlife Crisis, I believe that the medical establishment and pro-vaccine layperson public have inadvertently caused this growth in anti-vax sentiment. Physicians and other well-meaning pro-vaccine individuals pushed some vaccine-hesitant folks away by marginalizing their concerns, by creating and popularizing awful nonsense like the Herman Cain Award subreddit and Jimmy Kimmel's ill-advised, profane, pro-vaccine PSA, and by the wholesale endorsement of a bundle of COVID-related beliefs without sufficient acknowledgement of trade-offs and data limitations, and without offering room in their tribe for those whose views are more nuanced and whose views did not conform completely to the rest of the tribe. Through massive mistakes in science and public health communication, we've given fuel to the anti-vax movement. But having said that, the vaccine hesitant, they still outnumber anti-vaxxers, as I said before. There are still millions of unvaccinated Americans that can be convinced to accept the COVID vaccine through conversation and education. And I don't believe this group should be referred to as anti-vaxxers. But that doesn't mean actual anti-vaxxers don't exist. Aside from an inability to change their mind on vaccination, how else can you identify someone as a probable anti-vaxxer? Well, when engaged in a conversation about the COVID vaccines, an anti-vaxxer readily and quickly deploys the classic anti-vax arguments. The vaccines are not studied enough, despite the fact that they are the most studied medical interventions in history. The vaccines have not been studied for long enough, despite the fact that after 18 months and hundreds of millions of doses, there have been no safety signals to suggest the existence of delayed side effects. Natural immunity is better than vaccine-derived immunity. Even if that was true, which I concede it might be, you need to first be infected with COVID to acquire the natural immunity. And natural immunity plus vaccination definitely results in better immunity than either one alone. Big Pharma can't be trusted, despite tremendous oversight with the COVID vaccines and numerous independent analyses reaching the same conclusions on their safety and effectiveness as the pharmaceutical companies. If the vaccine manufacturers trusted their products, they would not be blocked from lawsuits by the vaccine injured, despite the fact that the vaccine injured are still compensated. It's just that in the US, they are compensated by the federal government, not directly by the companies, and that this arrangement, it predates the existence of COVID by 35 years. And of course, the vaccines have killed thousands of people, despite this claim, which is based on a profound misunderstanding of the vaccine adverse event reporting system, being repeatedly and thoroughly debunked. There are vaccine-related questions on which well-informed individuals with relevant scientific expertise can have a legitimate, rational disagreement, such as the current risk-benefit ratio of boosters in teens and young adults, and questions about the interval between vaccine doses, and questions about vaccine mandates. Those are one of policy and not science, so I would never refer to a pro-vaccine but anti-mandate individual as being anti-vax. But if an unvaccinated person is approached with pro-vaccine data and they immediately deflect with one of the aforementioned empty anti-vax arguments, they are probably an anti-vaxxer. I've seen many comments online, including on my channel, where someone says, "I can't be an anti-vaxxer because I've gotten my polio shot or my flu shot." To me, as a physician and strong supporter of evidence-based vaccination, that sounds kind of like I can't be sexist because I have 2 daughters. It's a nonsense argument. If you continue to steadfastly refuse vaccination, despite being presented with relevant data, and despite having your questions answered, if you keep moving the goalposts of what you would consider sufficient evidence to change your mind, and if you adopt classic, repeatedly debunked anti-vax talking points, you are an anti-vaxxer. It doesn't matter if we're talking about all vaccines or just the COVID vaccines. I've covered some of this ground in my video on the loss of empathy during the pandemic, but I do want to be clear here that I am not saying that anti-vaxxers are inherently bad people. While plenty of anti-vaxxers have deployed troll-like personas on social media, being an anti-vaxxer does not automatically make a person dumb or selfish. Aside from a tiny number who are knowingly distorting the truth for financial gain, the rest are simply promoting a sincerely held belief that was formed due to cognitive biases and due to exposure to misinformation that was largely beyond their control. I don't blame the vast majority of anti-vaxxers for being anti-vax, but it doesn't change the fact that the anti-vax label still applies to them. Do I think the word anti-vaxxer is a slur? No, I don't. Just because a person is offended by a label they've been given does not necessarily make the label itself offensive. To be honest, the whole "I'm offended by being called an anti-vaxxer," assuming the label has been accurately applied, it kind of confuses me because usually people who have such strong, outwardly expressed convictions, usually they're happy to be openly associated with that conviction. If not anti-vaxxer, I don't really know what label they would prefer. Pro-COVID? I don't know, but pro-COVID doesn't seem much better. And for anyone who would cite the importance of bodily autonomy here, that would make you anti-mandate it does not necessarily make you an anti-vaxxer, regardless of what Merriam-Webster has to say about it. In the meantime, I'm going to continue to use the term anti-vaxxer in my videos when the word applies. If you are an anti-vaxxer and you find the term offensive, you are welcome to unsubscribe from this channel, because by my definition, it's not possible for me or anyone else to change your mind about vaccines or to help you internalize new information that conflicts with your pre-existing beliefs. So I'm not really sure what you are doing here other than refilling your outrage meter. But for the vaccine hesitant viewers and the pro-vaccine anti-mandate viewers, thanks for watching to the end. I hope you realize now that I have not been referring to you specifically as anti-vaxxers during my last 7 or so vaccine videos. My wish would be that those who are not yet vaccinated, receive the answers to their questions, and have their concerns respectfully addressed and make the choice to get vaccinated. But, whether or not you've been vaccinated yourself and whether or not you support this or that vaccine mandate, I do hope all of you stay healthy and safe. And I hope that 2022 brings us all an end to this slow motion disaster. Thanks for watching.